Let's keep a little bit of flour up here in this area, and we'll use that as needed. But where we're going to be shaping the dough, no flour. We want to make sure that the dough can stick to itself. If there's any flour on the dough, then it won't want to stick to itself. Okay, so I'm going to put a little flour on my hands. At this point, we're going to lightly degas the dough. Sort of cupping my hand over the dough. A little bit of degassing. This will ensure that we won't have any giant caverns inside the loaf after it's baked. There might be some really large gas bubbles. It would be beneficial to degas them at this point, just lightly, because we do want to maintain a nice open structure. Okay, flip it over. Now we're going to loosely form a rectangle. I'm going to go from one side here, fold it up and over just past the middle, let it stick. Same thing with this side, up and over, so they overlap a little bit. Make sure that sticks. Now we're going to make the bottom just a little bit wider than the top. Make sure your dough is in line here so that the sides are straight, the bottom is a little bit wider than the top. Take your time to keep it in shape as you go. So with this flour up here, you can kind of drag your dough through the flour like that just to make sure the bottom isn't sticking, and then remove any excess. Okay, so bottom's a little bit wider than the top. We're going to take the top, fold it just past the center. Okay, now we're going to roll it down again. We're going to push down and back, so we're building tension right here. This tension is what's going to help keep the shape of the loaf. Alright, and then last, we're going to roll it over, and then we're going to pinch the seam where the two sides come together. I'm just going to roll this up and show you so you know what we're talking about. It's going to be this seam right here where these two edges come together. Okay, so here, use the palm of your hand and really pinch that shut so it's really sealed. Roll it onto the seam, and now here you can adjust your loaf shape a little bit as needed. Okay, and that's the loaf shape. So I'm just going to let that sit just for 10 seconds just so it seals itself. A little bit of flour on top. Flip it over so seam side is up. And then we drop it right into our proofing basket. I'm going to do that one more time with our other piece. Same thing, I'm going to remove excess flour from the work area. I'm going to loosely shape this into a rectangle. Bring one side in, up and over. Oh, in fact, I'm sorry. Forgot to degas. That'll be an important step here. So do that before you start shaping, like we did the last time. Okay, back to shaping. So we've got one side already folded over. Now fold the other side over. Make sure it's sticking. The bottom's going to be a little wider than the top. And take the top, stretch it down, fold it just past the center. And do that again. Push it down and back to build tension there. Over. Seal it right on the seam. Adjust it a little bit. Let it sit for just a minute. So we're doing the same basically batard shape, but we're going to proof it in a round basket. Nothing wrong with that. One of my Dutch ovens is round, so the way this will end up final proofing actually works out. We could also do a boule, a round shape for this loaf, but for the sake of this recipe we're going to keep all the shaping the same size. Just wanted to show you that you can still do this type of batard final shape and still proof it in a round basket. Okay, now we're going to let this final proof for 2 to 3 hours, and I'll show you what to look for to make sure you know it's ready to go in the oven when it's so you know when it's ready to fire. So when you're into the final proofing stage, you want to consider that you want to preheat your Dutch ovens at 500 degrees in your oven 45 minutes prior to baking time. So at the 2-hour mark, at this point, I would go ahead and turn on your oven and start preheating those. So these loaves I've been proofing for about 3 hours and 45 minutes. I was only going to proof them for 3 hours, and I was late coming home from doing something. So they went a little long, but they actually still look good. So I'm going to show you what you're looking for to see when your bread is ready to put into the oven. So to check if it's ready to go into the oven, push into the dough with your finger and see how the divot bounces back. It should bounce back, but slowly, and the indentation should remain in the dough. So I don't know how well it translates to the video, but when I poke that, it actually bounces back a little bit, but it doesn't go all the way flush. So that to me tells me these loaves are ready. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put them into our Dutch ovens. I'm going to score the top first. I have the Dutch ovens, they've been preheating already for about 45 minutes. So that's really hot. I've made some slings using parchment paper. So basically you just cut an oval shape out of parchment paper. I've been baking on these. I've probably done, I think, 5 bakes on these. I keep using these until they fall apart and I can't use them anymore. So cut a piece of parchment paper. This will help you load the bread into the Dutch oven without over manipulating the dough and degassing it. Place it directly on top. Then gently invert this onto your hand. Be careful in case the dough is sticking to your proofing basket. Go slow. Here's the loaf. Now we're going to make one cut using a razor blade. This is called a lame, L-A-M-E. You can also just hold a razor blade or use a serrated knife or another really sharp knife. We're going to make one cut right down the middle. Make sure that's opened up there. Alright, now this is going to get lowered directly into here. This pot could be a little bit bigger. You can see how this is really, the dough's a little bit strained and this is kind of opening up. So FYI, if you have a slightly larger Dutch oven, you'll get better results. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other loaf. The oven is set at 500. I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes, and then I'll show you what it looks like after 20 minutes. 20-minute timer just went off, so these have been in the oven at 500 degrees for 20 minutes. Now we're going to remove the lids. Look nice. Back in the oven. Now we're going to set temperature to 475 and set your timer for 8 minutes. 8-minute timer just went off. Rotate these 180 degrees. Keep the oven at 475. Reset your timer for another 7. This came out of the oven. We did 20 minutes with the lids on at 500 degrees, 8 minutes with the lid off at 475, and then an additional 7 minutes at 475. So total baking time, 35 minutes. When they come out of the oven, they should feel light relative to their volume. So when you pick it up, it should not feel dense or heavy. These feel light. So to me, that tells me that we proofed everything long enough and that the fermentation was good. So in about an hour or so, we'll cut into one and see how we did, see how it looks like on the inside. So here are the finished loaves. They've had a chance to cool off. I let them cool for over an hour. Make sure you let them cool off at least an hour. It's really tempting to cut into them when they first come out of the oven, but it's really important you let them cool off for at least an hour. Several hours is better. But when you first pull the loaf out of the oven, it's actually still cooking inside for a little bit. So it's super important. So anyway, the loaves look good. They got nice color range from really dark to light. I like to see that. I like a nice dark color. We bake hotter for a shorter amount of time to ensure that we have a thin crust. So we're going to cut into these now and look at the crumb structure and just make sure that the rest of our process yielded something good. Here's how it looks like on the inside. It's a nice open crumb structure. It's soft. The fermentation is pretty consistent and even. We don't have any big giant holes anywhere. So I think our shaping was good. We degassed a little bit, so that was good. You can see the crust is nice and thin. I personally just don't like having to chew forever on a crust, so I like it this way. So that looks good. Cut into this other one also. So mostly good. You can actually see a flaw in our shaping here. When I coiled this one down, there may have been a little bit of flour here. You could see this part. So just make sure that brush off all excess flour and make sure that when you roll it down that you are building tension to make sure that the dough adheres to itself. But overall, for a yeasted loaf of bread, I think we did really good. So hope you guys have learned something from this, and hope you give it a shot. Feel free to ask me any questions once you start working on it. Thanks.